So there's a rumor going around about the FNAF movie, which both makes sense to me in a way and also kind of irks me a little bit if true. It's going to sound like a weird hill to die on, but oh well, this is how I feel, agree or don't. The rumor is that the Five Nights at Freddy's movie does not take place over the course of 5 nights. Rather, it's one long nightmarish night on the job. I even kind of imagine the filmmakers might break the entire movie up into like sequential hours on the job until the clock strikes 6 a.m. or something. I don't know. On one hand, I get it, but I just personally draw the line at this idea that it doesn't make sense to have a protagonist actually spend 5 whole nights at the establishment, much less come back each night willingly for a paycheck. Is it a little nuts? Sure. Is it impossible to justify? I don't think so, no. So, to prove it, I guess, I am briefly going to go over what was originally some of my own Five Nights at Freddy's movie pitch, which did take place over 5 nights. I'm not going to go into all of it, we don't have time, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't get very far. It's pretty sparse. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that 5 nights dynamic work in a movie, and I think I got it. Full disclosure, my protagonist was not Mike Schmidt. Completely different guy, original character. No relation to William Afton. That was all part of the overall story. Mostly based on the first game's lore. There was an ongoing mystery element that occurred while the protagonist was like not on the job, or was before he clocked in or after he clocked in, where he was sort of slowly uncovering the truth of the pizzeria and what had happened there. Unpaid detective work, curiosity and all that. Intrigue. So the first night, nothing much happens. He's creeped out, but admittedly not enough happens to really tip him off that something sinister is going on. He talks himself into thinking that, he's blowing it out of proportion, he's imagining things, so he goes home and sort of laughs it all off. Night 2 rolls around, stuff starts to intensify. Things are getting weird. He's still sort of the opinion that things are fine, but now he's not so sure anymore. The animatronics are getting more, antagonistic, worrisome. Our protagonist is now kind of suspicious, but he hasn't seen enough yet to tell him to leave his post or his paycheck. Night 3, things get worse, to the point that the protagonist basically knows he's onto something. It's a turning point. It was sort of around the midpoint reversal, so if I remember correctly. Whatever the case is, he is now for sure something is going on. But he's convinced himself that the problem must be with the animatronics programming. He's not quite to the point yet where he's considering, possess animatronic suits by ghost children. Admittedly, this part's a little bit fuzzy, but bear with me. I'm going to hit all the stuff that I can remember to recount. Around this time in the story, things start to change and to go downhill a little bit. It's the complication period for those who do Keisha Tenketsu. The protagonist goes to his bosses at the end of the 3rd day. He confronts them about the animatronics. He thinks that they're freaking out and are becoming a real safety hazard, and he wants them to be looked into. His bosses don't listen to him. They gaslight him, coerce him to be quiet. He relents because he knows no matter how much conviction he has, he needs his paycheck more. By this time, the protagonist has already been looking into the history of the pizzeria, and some of the history about the child killings is already commonplace. But now he has some extra incentive to look into it because now he knows for certain something is going on here. He does some digging, some Google searching. He pokes around in the pizzeria looking at stuff, goes into the repair room a couple of times where the suits are, hanging up, etc. Starts piecing more and more stuff together. He goes to work the 4th night, knowing things are going to get worse. And they do. It's bad enough he almost dies. The next day, he walks out of the job. He's basically convinced himself he's going to quit. He doesn't care what the reason is for the animatronics freaking out and acting this way. He doesn't want any part of it anymore. Or maybe he did quit. I don't really remember. But it's at this point in the story, roughly, that he has a eureka moment. Admittedly, this part isn't as fleshed out as I want it to be, but it's not like I'm making the movie, so who cares? It's at this point in the story that he realizes that all of this has something to do with William Afton and the child killings, and that he might be the only person who can sort of bring closure to all of it, and the supernatural shenanigans that he's now for sure is going on inside the pizzeria. So of his own free will, the protagonist goes back the fifth night. He weathers the entire onslaught until morning, knowing that it puts him in potentially mortal danger, but with the motivation of possibly bringing justice to a bunch of innocent victims that had otherwise never gotten it, and sort of just doing something meaningful with his life, which was part of his arc. And that's about it. I think I actually saved the big reveal of the kids are ghosts and they've possessed the animatronics and they were the suits the whole time until the very end, because I think I played around with sort of revealing it after the fourth night, and it just sort of took all the wind out of it. I wanted the guy to feel like he was in peril the whole time. And I think I played around with the idea that William Afton was still sort of part of all this, and he hadn't been caught for the killings, and he was sort of keeping track of this guy and was going to have like this climactic showdown with him at the end because he knew that the protagonist was getting too close to finding out the truth. And I think I played around with the idea of Afton getting spring-trapped at the end, but again, I didn't get all that far. I left out some other stuff, but it hardly matters. It just wasn't very detailed to begin with. But one of the first things I worked out on that story was the whole reasoning of why the protagonist would be there for an entire work week. And when I tied it to his arc and the mystery element, it just wasn't all that hard to justify, really. Not to me, anyway. And the 5-night structure just sort of lent itself well to storytelling paradigms that already exist, like the monomyth, the Dan Harmon story circle, the 4-act plot structure, like Kisho Tenketsu, like I mentioned earlier. I don't know. I feel like it could have been done, and I feel like it could have been done rather easily, and probably by screenwriters a lot more talented than me. Anyway, as you were.